Hello and welcome to the Novel Brain with Dr. E. Today I'm going to talk about pandemic denial, and I'm going to try to offer some explanations behind why there might be people out there who are currently denying that coronavirus, COVID-19, is actually real. Alright, so let's just kick this off. Right now, we are looking at a coronavirus COVID-19 global case count of 1.2 million plus confirmed cases across the world. And we are definitely looking at some people out there, and I don't know, maybe you are one, and you're wondering, is this thing real? Do I really need to be staying home? I've read, and this is not any kind of endorsement of any kind of news or any kind of slam on certain people, but there are people who are like, why am I staying home again? Is this a government conspiracy? Well, guys, I'm here to tell you this is not any of that right now. This is a real pandemic, and what we have right now is a situation in front of us that we need to handle accordingly. Okay, so for the listeners who understand that I am out of Washington, D.C., this is not a political episode of my podcast. However, denial of pandemic types of situations don't occur exclusively in the political sphere. Now, there are people in politics who are gaining political power or perhaps even navigating their next political campaigns based off of this, and I think that's actually truly sad. It's not what we need to be doing. What we need to be doing is allowing our healthcare workers and our experts and scientists to really try and tackle this as best they can. So the political spin on things is really something that I think right now we should all just ignore, even though this is an election year, a major election year in the United States. That's not our priority, and I think that we should really try and look at what we can do to help the pandemic. So let's talk about psychology, and let's talk about why people may be having some kind of denial towards the coronavirus. Alright, so just looking back to some of my own training, I've looked into two areas. One's called attribution error, and the other is called theory of mind. I'm going to start off with the theory of mind first. This tells us that human beings are capable of attributing thoughts and intentions to other people. So that's tied in with the attribution error because we might try to understand and predict what other people are thinking, how they're going to react in certain situations, and we might be not so accurate when we do that. So within this framework, there's this peculiar thing called attribution error. So some of us might equate this to our uncles or older people in society who just don't believe people are acting correctly. Well, there is something about that with time. So we might have more attribution error as we grow older, but this type of error typically occurs when we think that other people are acting wrongly or overreacting. So we might hear some of our neighbors say, well, come on, this is just like the flu. Well, listen, I'm here to tell you this is not just like the flu. That's why it's a novel virus. This is something that is introduced for the very first time under different circumstances. It might have been a different epidemic or a different pandemic, but this is not your everyday average flu. So somebody who says you're overreacting, or maybe people are just acting wrong about this, I don't understand why people are behaving this way. Well, the experts can tell us that sometimes our brains fail to apply the most important instinct in our being as humans, and that is the instinct of survival. So let's not ignore our survival. Let's try to understand this better, and I do think that this theory of mind that we have, we need to open our minds into thinking that we could be experiencing some attribution error. And that's one reason why people are denying this whole pandemic. Okay, another reason why we might be having this kind of phenomenon is that there are some people who have a particular sense of preservation, where it's their individual welfare versus sort of the world's welfare or protection. And I think a lot of this has to do on two levels. One could just be on an individual level, and the other could be on an economical level. And so if you're looking at the state of affairs and maybe you are a CEO to some major corporation that's having to shut down right now, well, you may actually take it to the level where you're prioritizing your well-being because you no longer have 5 mansions and vacation homes and a stockpile of money. You actually have to sell everything. And so it's easier for you to understand that this doesn't exist, or there's some kind of reason why this is occurring. Maybe there's a conspiracy theory that you're behind. Now, I'm sorry for you, but that's not the case. You've had mass wealth in your life, but if you're looking at your own individual welfare versus the welfare of the global population, you really need to start thinking about these people who are dying are potentially your customers, and if you want to look at it fiscally, well, there's going to be a whole lot less customers if we don't just shut this thing down and actually handle it medically with some expertise in science. So let's consider the welfare of our population, our greater good, over our own individual welfare, and our own sense of preservation. Will always be there. We're always going to have that for our own families, but we have to start thinking about the greater good. In psychology, there's also another phenomenon called derealization. So the denial of pandemics is one thing, but it can also be explained by derealization by those folks who are in a world where they have everything they need, food, the internet, they have their families, they have schools, they have all these things, so there's not a bazillion things to complain about, but why this pesky coronavirus is here, and it just isn't explainable to them, and so there's this bit of derealization that maybe it's not true. So why should I believe there's this contagious virus out there taking the lives of potentially hundreds of thousands in a matter of months? Well, this is just a naive assumption, and I really think that just looking at the facts and looking, again, I'm not going to tell you where to get your news, but do look at the facts and look at the hospital data right now and look at cases. Don't look at the news if you can. Look at reliable sources and really just take an honest look at whether wherever you're getting your information is taking their own spin on things. So if it has a political tilt to it, if it has some kind of gain for somebody to be saying what they're saying, well, that's definitely a huge cautionary flag to take a look at your own realization of what life is and try not to look at this as an illusion. This is actually a reality. So do understand that this kind of phenomenon does take a toll on a lot of people. People who are incapable of accepting how serious things may be, and worst of all, actually have to act on it. These are actually the people who do fall into the derealization trap. So we have to be clear here. I'm here to present you some data. I'm also here to present you some phenomenon behind why this may be an actual thing, this whole pandemic denial. But this is going to cost people's lives, and I really want it to be here to tell you to stop, take a look around you. Maybe you just don't see it happening on your block, but if you look a little closer, the data shows that it's probably happening to somebody in your family. There's a lot of people who are asymptomatic, who are walking around like vectors with the COVID-19 virus, and I'm here to say you got to do your part. You got to stay home. All right, and so while you're home, it is a good time for you to think and reflect as to what your priorities are right now. And if there are people in power who are in fact denying or potentially even denying to the point of dysfunction, that is another reality that we have to live with. I don't want to bring you bad news, but it did take the American administration 70 days from the initial notification to treat this virus as something of a threat. That it wasn't just this harmless flu strain that we had under control, but and that actually was a lethal force that could definitely take out a lot of citizens. And this is definitely something we have to take seriously. So as you sit home, prioritize what it is that's important to you, and I'm sure that includes your family. So if you think about the health of your family, we have to think about not getting into contact with other people at this time. We have to also think about, why would I even be in some kind of denial if things are working for me? That's, again, this realization is real. For lack of another word, that's definitely a true statement. It's something that a lot of us may not even see happening. So I think it's a good time to check in and maybe check ourselves. I know that I have to do this regularly because I do have some political spins to some of the things that I do present. There are spins to it. And in hopes of not necessarily going into that too far, sometimes it's hard not to, with hard data in front of you and seeing how things are unfolding. So I'm not going to make any apologies to presenting data, and I believe folks like Dr. Fauci have done the best that they can to present data in a time where there's possibly an administration that does not necessarily agree or see eye to eye with him. I do know he's a medical doctor, and I think it's important to step back and take a look at, again, not just our priorities, but where we get our information and how we get our information and what it is that we do with that. And to try to remain apolitical during a difficult time and really try to be effective is not always easy. And I guess with that, I just want to close with a quote. And this is from a Republican pollster. This is Neil Newhouse. And he concluded this in a document that was shared with GOP leaders on Capitol Hill. He discussed it widely at the White House. And his quote is, "Denial is not likely to be a successful strategy for survival." I also want to include that later, he included two Trump's most ardent supporters. He said, quote unquote, "putting themselves and their loved ones in danger. We are at risk." I'm just going to throw that out there. This is a Republican pollster. This is not a Democrat or a left-winger or liberal. This is not an independent. This is somebody who is on the same party line as 45. So, he's even saying, let's not look at denial. This is definitely something we have to look at seriously. So with that, I'm going to close, and I intend to be back in a couple more days. I hope that you and your family are doing well and staying ahead of the curve. Let's do our best to defeat this, and into the future, let's do our best for our fellow women and men and children. Be well all.